I just want to get rid of it. All right, so we have 2n equals x squared minus x, and I want to complete the square. Now let's draw a picture because a lot of times completing the square, it's a little tricky. So I'm going to draw a picture because that's what works well for me. So we're saying the first term is x. The second term is x and -1. Oops, that doesn't go there. Okay, so this is x squared, and then this is actually going to be the sum of -1, or this is going to be, there's two of them, so this is going to be -1/2 x and -1/2 x, right? Because they have to be the same thing. So if that's the case, then that makes this -1/2 and this -1/2, and that's going to make this what? That was where we got the quarter before. Remember that? Okay, so drawing a picture really helps because now I can look at it and go, oh, okay, I just want to add a fourth to this side and a fourth to this side. This has to equal this, and this has to equal 2 times. They have to be the same. Okay, 2 times c. So then that's how I got the half, by the way. Okay, remember that? These two things have to be the same, and they have to add up to the middle term, which is -1. So I had -1/2 x plus -1/2 x, which is -1x, so it works out perfect, right? And then that told me that since this was x and this is -1/2 x, that this is half, and that's -1/2. -1/2 times -1/2 is 1/4. So now I can add a fourth to each side, and I get this beautiful thing. Okay, I really think this is how you're supposed to do this. Boy, it took me a second to figure that out. I'm like, we tried factoring, we tried these other things. It's all craziness. All right, that's why you had a question about this one. So now we have this. We have 1/4 plus 2n equals, and then we have this thing over here, and we're like, well, how did that make it easier? Well, we know that this factors as this, x minus 1/2, right, squared, because we just made it a perfect square. So this becomes x minus 1/2 squared. So we're going to actually, we can solve for x now. We just square root this, right? And we get 1/4 plus 2n square rooted equals x minus 1/2. Then I'm going to add 1/2 and add 1/2. And I get x equals the square root of 1/4 plus 2 times the number of connections I have plus 1/2. That's solving it for x. See that? I had to create a creating of the square. Now let's double check it with our work. Let's say, remember earlier we were saying let's make x equal to 8. Let's see if it works. If x was 8, remember we said there would be 28. N would be 28. There'd be 28 connections. Do you remember that? It was on the previous screen. We said that if x was 8, that we would be, n would equal, remember it was 8 times 8 minus 1 divided by 2, which is 56 divided by 2, which is 28. Remember we said that? All right, so let's check it. Let's put 28 in for n and see what happens. Let's check our work. Whew, man, I hope this works, don't you? All right, so we have 1/2 plus, and this is plus or minus, right? Because it's a square root. All right, square root 1/4 plus 2 times 28 equals x. So 2 times 28 is 56 plus 1/4. So we have 1/4 plus 56, or 56 and 1/4, and I'm going to want to convert that to one single fraction inside here, right? So 1/2. And then I'm going to look at this and say, okay, well, what's 56 plus 1/4? If I want to convert this, this 56 is actually going to be what? Some humongous number, 200 and, right, because I'm going to multiply it by 4. So I get 4 times 50 is 200, and 4 times 6 is 24. So I get 224 over 4. Is that correct? Yes. So this is actually 224 over 4 plus 1/4. This looks promising, by the way. Seriously, you might look at it as a huge mess, but I'm telling you, it looks wicked promising. All right, great. So now we have this inside, and we can combine the fractions. So this is actually 225 over 4 square rooted. Well, guess what, baby? When we add 220, when we have this 225 over 4, they're both perfect squares. So this is going to be, I got to go back up here and work up here because I'm running out of room. 225 square rooted over 4 square rooted, plus or minus, right? Because they could be negative or they could be positive. Okay, I've got that. And then I'm going to look at this and say, well, 225 square rooted is what? I'm trying to remember what it is. 12 squared is is it 15 squared? Because that's what I was thinking it was. 150, 200, yeah. It's 15 over 2 plus or minus 1/2, right? Now let's keep what they said. They said, remember, x cannot be 0. So 15 over 2 is 7.5 plus or minus 1/2. So 7.5, a half plus 7.5 is 8, or a half minus 7.5 is -7. Now, obviously, we cannot have a negative number of phones. So actually, we don't even need this minus here because we can't do that. So guess what we got? We got 8, which is what we said it should be because we rigged the problem. Do you remember that? Which means that we did this correctly.